The fluorescent lights of room 304 flickered slightly, casting eerie shadows across the classroom. It was supposed to be a routine detention, 6 students and 1 exhausted teacher stuck inside for an extra hour. Some were there for talking back to teachers, others for missing assignments. For Alex Carter, it was for skipping class, something he had done too many times to count. He drummed his fingers on the desk, staring at the clock. Just 15 more minutes. Then, the first scream shattered the silence. Emily, the quiet girl from the front row, had collapsed onto her desk, her body convulsing violently. Her chair crashed to the floor as she tumbled over, her limbs twisting unnaturally. "Emily?" Mr. Harrington, the teacher, rushed over. But before he could reach her, Emily let out an inhuman growl, her fingers clawing at the air. Her eyes, now a sickly yellow, locked onto the nearest student, Brian. "What the hell?" Brian muttered, stepping back. Too late. With terrifying speed, Emily lunged, sinking her teeth deep into his shoulder. Blood spurted out as Brian's scream filled the room, followed by panicked shouts. Chairs scraped against the floor as the students scrambled back, their minds refusing to accept what they were seeing. "Get away from her." Mr. Harrington grabbed a ruler, the closest thing to a weapon, and swung it at Emily's head. But she didn't even flinch. She tore into Brian's flesh like a wild animal, growling as his screams turned into helpless gurgles. Alex felt his legs freeze in place. This wasn't real. This had to be a prank, right? But then Brian stopped moving, his eyes rolling back. The entire room stood in shock as Emily released his lifeless body, blood dripping from her mouth. Then, Brian moved. The body that should have been dead twitched violently, then slowly pushed itself up. His head snapped toward the group, a low, guttural growl escaping his lips. Then, he attacked. Screams filled the air as chaos erupted. A girl named Jessica sprinted for the door, yanking at the handle. "It's locked," she cried, pounding on it. Mr. Harrington fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking too much to work properly. Behind him, Brian lunged toward another student, his teeth snapping just inches away. "Move!" Alex shouted, his instincts finally kicking in. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at Brian, knocking him back. "Out the window!" someone yelled. But before they could act, another student, Derek, collapsed, gripping his stomach. His face was turning the same sickly yellow as Emily's had before she attacked. "Oh God," Alex whispered. "It's spreading." The realization hit everyone at the same time. One by one, they were all turning. And they were trapped. The frantic pounding of fists on the classroom door echoed through the air as the surviving students huddled together. The sounds of gnashing teeth and monstrous growls outside were deafening, each noise reminding them that their safety was nothing but an illusion. Alex's heart raced as he pressed his back against the wall. His mind was a blur, struggling to comprehend the chaos unfolding. What had happened to Emily? To Brian? To Derek? What were they becoming? Why won't the door open? Jessica screamed, trying to force the handle again. Mr. Harrington, trembling in the corner, clutched his keys with white knuckles but couldn't seem to find the right one. His face was pale, covered in a sheen of sweat. The ruler he'd used to try and fend off the infected now lay discarded on the floor. "We're going to die in here," Jessica muttered under her breath, her eyes wild with fear. "Stay calm," Alex shouted, trying to get everyone's attention. "Panicking won't help. Panicking is all we can do." Brian's voice, hoarse and distorted, cut through the air. His once confident demeanor had been replaced with a look of primal terror. He looked at his own arm, where the bite marks were beginning to show signs of infection. His muscles twitched, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. "I'm turning. I can feel it," he whispered. I can't stop it. Someone, just end it now. Please." Alex looked at Brian, his chest tightening. The guilt, the helplessness, it all hit him in waves. But there was nothing they could do. The situation was beyond their control. What if we try to get out through the vents, suggested Maya, a quiet girl who'd kept her distance since the first attack. She had the look of someone trying to maintain composure but on the edge of losing it. We could get to the maintenance room and... Not an option, Alex interrupted. The vents lead to other classrooms. We'll be trapped if we go that way. We need to get out of here, but we're locked in. As if on cue, the rattling of the classroom door grew louder, more frantic. The infected outside had sensed their presence. Alex knew they couldn't wait any longer. We have to break out, now, Alex said, his voice steady. He quickly scanned the room, searching for anything that could help them. The windows were too high to reach, and the desks were far too solid to use as shields. He glanced at the teacher's desk and spotted a heavy glass vase, sitting innocently at the corner. We can use that, he said, pointing toward the vase. Maya quickly grabbed it, her trembling hands wrapping around the cool glass. Are you sure it'll break the window? Only one way to find out, Alex said. The group moved quickly, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that gnawed at them. Maya lifted the vase, her arms shaking, and with one swift motion, threw it at the window. The glass shattered in a spectacular explosion, sending shards flying in all directions. Alex peered through the broken window, scanning the grounds outside. The night was still, the school bathed in an eerie orange glow from the streetlights, but the streets were empty. Let's go, Alex said, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew there was no time to waste. But as he stepped forward, ready to climb out, a sudden realization hit him. Wait, he muttered. We don't know what's outside. What if there's more of them out there? The group fell silent. The air grew heavy with the weight of uncertainty. I'll go first, Alex said. You guys stay low, and follow me. We'll stick together. They all nodded, despite the fear that was gnawing at their insides. One by one, they scrambled up to the window, trying not to make a sound. Brian hesitated at the window, his face filled with terror as his transformation continued. The deepening sickness was impossible to ignore. His body trembled, and his eyes shifted, unfocused and wild. I can't, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm not. Before anyone could react, Brian lunged, pushing Alex backward with a burst of unnatural strength. His teeth snapped just inches from Alex's face, his mouth frothing as he snarled in hunger. Brian, no! Maya screamed, but it was too late. The others backed away in horror, the cold air pouring through the window as Alex struggled to hold back Brian. The transformation had overtaken him fully, and he was no longer the person they once knew. In a desperate move, Alex kicked Brian off him, sending him crashing against the wall. Brian fell to the floor, writhing, but Alex knew this wasn't the same person anymore. The infection had taken hold completely. We have no choice, Alex said, his voice low and tight. We have to go now. With one final look at the classroom they'd been trapped in, the students squeezed through the broken window, each of them carrying the weight of their decision with them. They were running from what was once a normal night, from friends they might never see again, from a world that was crumbling in front of them. As they made their way toward the empty streets, their footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. They were alone, truly alone, in the world of the infected. And for the first time, Alex realized the truth, this wasn't just a nightmare. This was their new reality. The cool night air hit Alex like a slap in the face as he stepped onto the deserted school grounds, the rest of the group following close behind. The horror of what had just happened in the classroom continued to reverberate in his mind. Brian, his old friend. The one he used to laugh with in the halls. Now, he was something else entirely, something monstrous. Alex could still hear the guttural growls, the sickening snap of Brian's teeth as he had tried to tear into him. It made him shudder just thinking about it. Where are we going? Maya asked, her voice shaking as she peered into the darkness. I don't know, Alex admitted. His mind was racing, trying to piece together some kind of plan, but nothing made sense anymore. He couldn't shake the image of Brian's transformation, the way his body had jerked and spasmed uncontrollably, as though it wasn't even his own. Alex had known that the infection was spreading, but seeing his friend, someone who had been as human as he was, turn into that thing was another level of horror he wasn't prepared for. "Should we try the exit at the front?" Jessica suggested, her voice trembling as she looked over her shoulder, half expecting the infected to appear at any moment. Alex turned his head toward the front gates of the school, barely visible in the distance. There was a dim light from a street lamp casting shadows, but no movement. The streets were still eerily silent. The whole world felt like it was holding its breath. Before Alex could answer, a distant explosion shook the ground beneath them. The sound was deafening, followed by the deep rumble of fire rising from the city beyond. They could see the orange glow of flames on the horizon, illuminating the night sky in an unnatural hue. Was that the military?" Jessica asked, her voice full of tentative hope. "Maybe," Alex said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. They had no way of knowing who was still alive out there or how far the infection had spread. A sudden scream pierced the night. It came from the school, an unmistakable cry of pain and terror. The group froze in place, all of them instinctively turning toward the source of the sound. That came from inside. Maya gasped, her face pale. "We have to go back. Someone's still in there." For a moment, Alex considered it. The idea of returning to the school, where the infection was rapidly spreading, was terrifying. But the thought of leaving anyone behind, someone who might be alive, felt wrong. "We can't," Alex said, shaking his head. "We don't know how bad it is in there now. We can't risk it." But Jessica started to protest, but Alex interrupted her. "I know you want to help," he said, his voice firm but pained. "But if we go back, we'll be trapped. We need to keep moving." The group stood in tense silence, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the air. They all knew Alex was right. There was no time to waste. If they didn't leave now, they would risk getting caught in the chaos. But the guilt of abandoning others, even if it meant their own survival, gnawed at them. Alex turned and began walking toward the street, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. They needed to get as far from the school as possible, away from the infection. The world was already falling apart, and he wasn't sure how much longer they could survive in this new, twisted reality. The streets were strangely empty as they walked, only the distant sounds of fire and occasional sirens breaking the silence. The city was burning, but Alex couldn't stop. Not yet. Not when there were too many unanswered questions, too many unknowns. "What was that explosion?" Maya asked again, her voice tinged with fear. "I don't know," Alex admitted. "Maybe they're bombing the city to contain the outbreak." "Contain it?" Maya's voice rose in disbelief. "You can't just bomb the city and hope the infection stops. That's..." She was interrupted by another loud explosion, this time much closer, rattling the ground beneath their feet. The shockwave sent them stumbling, knocking them off balance. "Run!" Alex shouted, instinctively grabbing Maya's arm and pulling her along as the ground shook. The group sprinted down the road, hearts pounding, not knowing where to go or what they were running from. But they had no choice. They couldn't stand still. "Do you think we'll make it out of here?" Jessica's voice was a desperate whisper, the fear in her eyes evident. "We'll make it," Alex said, though he wasn't sure if he truly believed the words. Another scream echoed in the distance, this one louder, more urgent. It was a cry for help. A human voice, begging for mercy. But Alex knew, deep down, that there was no saving anyone who was already infected. As they rounded the corner, Alex saw something that made his stomach drop, a large military truck barreling toward them, its headlights blinding in the night. The truck screeched to a halt, and a soldier in full gear jumped out, his rifle raised. "Stop right there," the soldier shouted, his voice commanding. "You're not safe out here. Get in the truck, now." Alex hesitated. Who could they trust anymore? The world had changed, and everyone was out for their own survival. But this might be their only chance to escape. To survive. "We need to go," the soldier barked again, his eyes scanning the dark street for signs of movement. Alex glanced at the others. Maya, Jessica, and the rest of the group stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But there was no time left to think. They had to make a decision, fast. "Go!" Alex shouted, making up his mind. "Get in the truck!" Without another word, the group ran toward the truck, climbing into the back. As the soldiers slammed the door shut, the truck's engine roared to life, and they sped off into the night, leaving the burning city behind. But as they drove, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far worse. The truck jolted over the uneven road as it sped through the empty streets, the sound of tires screeching and engines roaring echoing in the silent, desolate city. Alex and the others clung to the back of the military vehicle, trying to steady themselves amidst the chaos of the rough ride. The city they once knew, the places they'd laughed, studied, and dreamed in, were now nothing more than ruins. Flames from distant fires illuminated the sky, casting everything in an orange, apocalyptic glow. "Where are they taking us?" Jessica asked, her voice tight with anxiety, her face pale in the dim light. She had been quiet since they got into the truck, too stunned to speak, as though the reality of what was happening hadn't fully sunk in yet. "We're just going to have to trust them," Alex replied, glancing back at the soldier driving the truck. The man hadn't said a word since they got in, his attention fixed on the road ahead, his face concealed by a helmet and visor. The only thing they knew about him was his uniform, a soldier of the military's emergency response unit. They drove for what seemed like hours, the world outside a blur of broken streets and shattered buildings. The radio crackled intermittently with static, but no coherent messages came through. Then, suddenly, the truck veered off the main road and into a smaller, quieter street, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The buildings on either side were dark, abandoned, just like the rest of the city. "Where are we going?" Maya asked again, her voice now laced with suspicion. "We're not going to survive out here much longer," the soldier spoke for the first time, his voice muffled through his helmet. "You're lucky I found you. The city's gone to hell." "Is it safe?" Alex asked, his stomach tightening. He didn't trust the soldier completely. How could he, after everything they'd seen? The infection was spreading too fast, and Alex wasn't sure who the real enemy was anymore, the infected or the government that might be hiding the truth from them. The soldier didn't respond immediately, and the silence stretched on, making Alex more uneasy. The truck finally pulled into an old industrial complex on the outskirts of town, surrounded by high fences and barbed wire. There were a few other military vehicles parked in the lot, their headlights flashing as soldiers moved around, loading supplies into the building. "We're here," the soldier said, pulling the truck to a stop. "Get out." The group climbed out of the truck, their legs stiff from the long ride. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, and a faint, metallic scent lingered in the air, mixing with the stench of decay. They followed the soldier through the gates and into the complex, where more soldiers stood guard. Inside, the building was dimly lit, filled with a strange mix of military equipment and makeshift medical supplies. It was a far cry from the sterile, orderly atmosphere Alex might have expected from a government facility. Instead, it felt like a place where people were being hidden away, or worse, experimented on. "What is this place?" Maya whispered, her eyes darting around the room as they walked. The soldier didn't respond, simply motioning for them to keep moving. They passed several rooms, some filled with medical beds, others with computers and monitors blinking erratically. In one corner, Alex noticed a row of large steel doors, each marked with an ominous warning sign. "What's behind those doors?" Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. The soldier's gaze flicked toward the doors, his face unreadable. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said quickly. "Come on." They were led into a small, sterile room where a few more soldiers were stationed, monitoring the screens and equipment. A large table sat in the center, covered with various medical instruments and papers. One of the soldiers there was bent over a clipboard, scribbling notes, his eyes darting back and forth between the documents and the monitor on the wall. "Here we are," the soldier said, stopping just inside the doorway. He motioned for Alex and the others to sit on a nearby bench. I'm going to get someone who can explain all of this, he continued, his voice strangely flat. Just wait here. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, a heavy silence fell over the room. Alex felt the weight of the air pressing down on him, suffocating him with the uncertainty of everything. There were too many unanswered questions. Too many things that didn't make sense. Alex, Maya whispered, her voice low and urgent. Something's not right. This place. It's not a safe zone. It feels like they're hiding something. I know, Alex muttered, his gut tightening. He had felt at the moment they entered the building, the strange, tense energy that seemed to hum beneath the surface. They weren't just survivors in a quarantine zone. They were being kept here for a reason, and that reason was not for their safety. Suddenly, the door to the room opened again, and a tall man in a white lab coat walked in, flanked by two heavily armed soldiers. He had an air of authority about him, his sharp features and cold eyes giving off a sense of someone who had seen too much and was no longer affected by the horrors of the world. I'm Dr. Hargrove, the man said, his voice smooth but devoid of any warmth. I'm in charge of this facility. You must be the survivors from the school. Alex felt his pulse quicken as Dr. Hargrove's gaze swept over them. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at them, as though they were nothing more than lab specimens. We've been monitoring the spread of the infection, Dr. Hargrove continued, his tone clinical. The virus has reached critical levels in several cities. This facility was set up to isolate and control the outbreak. Unfortunately, it's spreading faster than anticipated. You're not telling us everything, Maya spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. What is really going on here? What happened to everyone in the city? Why is the military keeping us here? Dr. Hargrove didn't flinch. He simply nodded, as if he had expected the question. The infection, he began, isn't just a virus. It's a weapon, a biological weapon. And it's only the beginning. A chill ran down Alex's spine as the weight of his words settled in. Biological weapon? That meant this wasn't an accident, wasn't something that had just happened. This had been planned. We need to stop it before it spreads further, Dr. Hargrove continued. And we need your help. The room fell silent, the implications of his words hanging heavy in the air. Alex exchanged a look with the others. They weren't just survivors. They were part of something much bigger than they had ever imagined. And now, they were trapped in the middle of it. Alex's mind raced as Dr. Hargrove's words echoed in his ears. A biological weapon. It was impossible to fully grasp what he had just said. How could this all be part of some sick plan? Were they truly just pawns in a much larger game? What do you mean we need to help? Jessica's voice broke the heavy silence, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. We're just survivors. You brought us here to be safe, right? Not to be your guinea pigs. Dr. Hargrove didn't seem fazed by her accusation. Instead, he simply sighed, the corners of his mouth lifting into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. You misunderstand, he said coolly, pacing back and forth in the small, sterile room. You're not here because we think you're expendable. You're here because you are essential. Alex could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as Dr. Hargrove's words sunk in. The man's calm demeanor, the clinical way he spoke, it didn't match the gravity of the situation. There was something cold, calculating behind those eyes, and it unsettled Alex even more than the infected had. We've been studying the progression of the virus, Dr. Hargrove continued. The initial outbreak happened several weeks ago. It was believed to be a natural mutation at first, but soon we discovered otherwise. The virus was engineered to spread rapidly, mutating its hosts into what you've come to call zombies. But it's not just about turning people into mindless monsters. There's something more, something far more dangerous. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The idea that this had all been orchestrated by someone, that it wasn't an accident or a freak outbreak, was too much. The virus, this nightmare, was a weapon designed for something far darker than just wiping out a population. What's the real plan? Maya's voice was sharp, her tone demanding an answer. What are you doing to stop this? Dr. Hargrove's eyes flicked to her, his expression unchanged. Stopping it? You misunderstand again. The virus cannot be stopped. It has evolved beyond our control. The only thing we can do now is use it. Use it? Jessica's voice shook with disbelief. You want to use this monster of a virus on people? Not people, Dr. Hargrove corrected smoothly. We have a different goal in mind. We were attempting to weaponize the virus, to use it against our enemies. But as we've seen, its effects are unpredictable. It spreads too quickly, mutates in ways we didn't expect. There's no way to control it entirely. What we can do, however, is use the survivors, like you, as test subjects. Test subjects. The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. Test subjects? Maya's voice was quiet, but her words held the weight of someone who had just realized the magnitude of their situation. What are you talking about? You're saying we're part of an experiment? Dr. Hargrove nodded without hesitation. Yes. You've been exposed to the virus, but you have not fully succumbed to its effects. We need to study you. We need to understand why some of you are immune, while others, like your friend Brian, are rapidly infected. If we can isolate the factors that allow some individuals to survive, we can use that knowledge to create a cure or a better version of the virus. One that we can control. Alex's heart hammered in his chest. This was worse than anything he could have imagined. They weren't safe here. They were just lab rats, caught in the middle of a madman's experiment. The infection that had spread across the world wasn't some accident, it was a carefully crafted weapon. And now, they were expected to play their part. I'll never help you, Maya said, her voice shaking with fury. You're insane if you think we're going to let you experiment on us. I agree, Jessica said, stepping forward. We're not your lab rats. We didn't sign up for this. Dr. Hargrove's expression remained stoic. You have no choice, he said coldly. Your survival depends on your cooperation. If you refuse, we will have no option but to treat you as hostile entities. We've seen firsthand what happens when people try to escape or fight back. Alex's fists clenched at his sides, but he knew the truth. They were trapped. If they tried to run, they would be hunted. They were nothing more than experiments in this twisted facility. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed open. A young woman in a military uniform rushed in, her face flushed and panicked. Dr. Hargrove, you need to see this. We've had another breach. A breach? Dr. Hargrove's voice was cold and unconcerned as he turned to face her. What do you mean? The woman hesitated for a moment, then spoke quickly. One of the test subjects escaped. We think it's one of the infected. It's spreading in the compound. Dr. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark passing across his face. How did it get out? He demanded. We don't know, sir. We were monitoring the containment area, but the subject got loose. It's moving through the lower levels now. We need to secure the perimeter. Alex's blood ran cold. The thought of one of the infected being in the compound was terrifying. If the virus had already breached their supposed safe zone, they were all in far greater danger than they had imagined. We need to act quickly, Dr. Hargrove said, his voice suddenly taking on a note of urgency. Secure the facility. Lock everything down. We cannot let this infection spread beyond the compound. As the woman rushed out of the room to carry out orders, Dr. Hargrove turned back to Alex and the others. This situation is evolving faster than we anticipated, he said, his tone almost thoughtful. It's no longer just about studying the survivors. It's about survival. If you want to make it out of here alive, you'll need to stay close. And you'll need to cooperate. Alex's mind was racing. It was all happening too fast. The escape, the military, the virus, it was all a nightmare, and there seemed to be no way out. But there was one thing Alex knew for sure now, they couldn't trust anyone in this facility, not even Dr. Hargrove. Whatever he said, Whatever promises he made, they were just a means to an end. And Alex wasn't about to let himself become part of his twisted experiment. The door slammed shut again, and Alex felt a sense of foreboding settle deep in his chest. Time was running out, and the infected weren't the only danger in this place. They were in the eye of a storm, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The metallic clank of heavy doors slamming shut echoed through the facility, followed by the distant sounds of soldiers shouting orders. Alex's pulse quickened as Dr. Hargrove's cold words lingered in his mind. There was no doubt now, the situation was spiraling out of control. The infected had breached the compound, and it was only a matter of time before they would all be in grave danger. "Lock everything down," Dr. Hargrove had ordered, his face pale for the first time since they'd arrived. "We cannot afford another outbreak. If the infected spread here, we'll lose control completely." Alex felt a sense of dread seep into his bones. The walls that had felt safe just moments before now seemed like a prison, one they were all too soon to be trapped inside. "What's happening?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling as she looked around the room. "What did he mean by a breach?" "The infected, they've gotten out of their containment areas," Alex said, trying to make sense of it. "That's what they meant. A test subject must have escaped. If the virus spreads within the compound, it could wipe out everyone here, soldiers, scientists, and us." Jessica's eyes widened in fear. "So we're stuck here, surrounded by them?" Alex nodded grimly. "For now, yes." Dr. Hargrove's orders echoed in the hallways as more soldiers rushed past, weapons drawn and eyes darting around, looking for signs of the infected. The atmosphere in the facility was no longer clinical, it was tense, chaotic, as everyone scrambled to contain the disaster. "I thought you said we were safe," Maya said, her voice bitter with disbelief. "How could you let this happen?" "We were supposed to be protected." "We are protected," Alex said, though he didn't feel it. "We just have to stay calm. The military will figure it out. They'll clean this up." But even as he spoke, a loud, frantic crash echoed from down the hall. A door had been torn off its hinges, followed by guttural growls and snarls. Alex's stomach turned at the sound. The infected were here. "Everyone, move," a soldier shouted as he ran past, his face pale and wild with fear. "They're loose, lock the doors. Secure all exits." Dr. Hargrove, who had been standing silently at the front of the room, turned sharply at the sound of the chaos. His eyes darkened, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he walked slowly to a wall-mounted console and began typing furiously, his fingers moving with an unsettling calm. "What's going on?" Maya asked, her voice laced with fear. "What are you doing?" "I'm initiating lockdown procedures," Dr. Hargrove said, not looking up. "We need to contain the situation. If we don't, the infected will overrun us in minutes." Alex exchanged a glance with Maya and Jessica. They were still trapped, still at the mercy of Dr. Hargrove and his twisted plans. The walls they thought were a temporary shelter were now becoming their tomb. "How do we get out of here?" Jessica asked urgently, her eyes scanning the room for an exit. "There has to be another way." "There's no way out unless you cooperate," Dr. Hargrove said, his voice tinged with cold finality. "If you run, you'll be caught in the crossfire. You're safer here, with me." Alex clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger. This was it. They were stuck between a mad scientist and a growing army of the infected. The only choice they had was to survive, and Alex knew that meant getting out of this facility, and fast. "Let's go," he said quietly to Maya and Jessica. "We're not staying here. We're getting out." Before anyone could protest, Alex moved quickly, his mind racing. He didn't know where they were headed, but the longer they stayed in this building, the more likely they were to be caught. They needed a plan. They needed freedom. The three of them moved swiftly through the halls, trying to stay low. Soldiers were everywhere, running in panic, shouting orders to one another, and sealing off rooms. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls, and the smell of smoke began to seep into the corridors, mixing with the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of shrieking, high-pitched and chilling, echoed down the hall. Alex's blood ran cold. One of the infected had made its way into the building. He turned to Maya and Jessica. "We need to find a way out now. Follow me." They pushed through the corridors, trying to stay out of sight. The hallway they were in ended at a set of reinforced doors. Alex glanced back at the others, their faces tense and fearful. "This is it," he said quietly. "We go through these doors, and we find a way out." Before they could make a move, a loud, sickening scream split the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against metal. Alex's heart pounded. The infected were getting closer. "We don't have time," Maya hissed, grabbing his arm. "We have to move now." He pushed open the heavy doors, his heart pounding as he led them into a narrow, dimly lit stairwell. As they descended deeper into the bowels of the facility, the sounds of chaos, shouting, gunfire, and the growls of the infected grew distant but unmistakable. Alex's mind raced. They needed a way out, but they couldn't just walk into the streets, they didn't know what was waiting for them outside. The city was in ruins, consumed by the outbreak. And even if they managed to escape this facility, they would still be hunted. "How do we get out of here?" Jessica's voice trembled as they reached the bottom of the stairwell, emerging into a large underground room filled with equipment, cables, and more military personnel scrambling to secure the area. Alex scanned the room. In the far corner, a heavy metal door stood ajar, revealing what appeared to be a loading bay. The door leading outside. "That's our exit," he said, pointing toward the door. But just as they began to move toward it, an explosion shook the building. The ground trembled beneath them, and the walls cracked. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the loud, sickening growl of the infected echoed through the corridors. The breach had already reached this level. "We need to go, now!" Alex shouted, motioning for the others to follow. They ran toward the loading bay door, their footsteps muffled by the chaos around them. As they reached the exit, Alex turned to make sure they weren't being followed. The infected were everywhere now, too many to count. "Move," he yelled, as the door creaked open, leading them into the nightmarish world outside. The compound was collapsing, and they were no longer safe. The nightmare was just beginning. The cool night air hit Alex's face as they stumbled out of the facility and into the open, but the relief was short-lived. The world outside was far more terrifying than they had imagined. The compound's walls loomed behind them like a dying beast, and the night sky above was filled with the distant glow of fires that lit up the chaos of the city. They had escaped the clutches of Dr. Hargrove and his sick experiment, but they were far from safe. The virus had spread beyond the facility. The world was crumbling around them. And now, they were running for their lives. "Where do we go?" Jessica panted, her eyes wide with panic as she looked around. "This place, it's all destroyed." Alex turned to face her, trying to steady his breathing. "We can't stay here. We need to keep moving. There has to be a safe zone, a place where we can regroup." Maya, scanning the street ahead, grabbed Alex's arm. "Look, we don't know what's out there. We don't even know if anyone's left to help us. The infected could be anywhere." Alex's eyes flicked to the horizon. The city's skyline, once vibrant and full of life, was now a twisted silhouette against a sky lit by the glow of burning buildings. The infected were everywhere. The first waves of chaos had already hit. Destruction had swept through the streets in the wake of the outbreak, and now, every shadow felt like a threat. It was impossible to tell where the danger was coming from. "We'll make it," Alex said with more conviction than he felt. "We can't stop now. We just need to stay ahead of them." As they moved cautiously through the streets, the sounds of distant screams and the sickening growls of the infected echoed through the air. A few figures staggered in the distance, their grotesque, twisted bodies moving aimlessly. Alex's stomach turned at the sight. The infection had already spread like wildfire. People had been turned into monsters, their humanity lost in the tide of the virus. They reached a narrow alley, the kind of place where shadows could conceal anything. Alex's senses were on high alert, and every step felt like a risk. He glanced at the others. Jessica's face was pale, but she was determined. Maya looked tense, her hand gripping a rusty pipe she had picked up along the way, ready to defend herself. Suddenly, a sound, a scraping noise, came from the other side of the alley. It was subtle at first, but then it became unmistakable, the guttural moan of the infected. Alex froze. His heart pounded as his eyes darted around the alley. There was no time to run. The infected were closing in, and there was no way to avoid them. "They're here," Maya whispered, her voice tight with fear. Alex held up a hand to signal silence. The noise was getting louder now, the unmistakable shuffle of the infected getting closer. In the darkness, Alex could make out the vague shapes of several figures stumbling toward them. Their eyes glowed with a soulless hunger, their movements jerky and erratic. "Stay quiet," Alex hissed, motioning for them to crouch against the wall. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. "We can't let them hear us." But just as they crouched low, Jessica accidentally knocked over a trash can. The loud clatter echoed through the alley, and in an instant, the infected turned, their heads jerking toward the sound. "Run!" Alex shouted. The group took off at full speed, their breath ragged as they sprinted through the narrow streets. The infected gave chase, their groans growing louder with each passing second. Alex's mind raced. There was no time to plan, no time to think. They had to escape, now. They turned down another alley, and Alex could feel the familiar thrum of panic surging through his veins. The streets were unfamiliar. Every turn felt like it led them deeper into the heart of the city, where the infected roamed freely. The distant sound of sirens was a faint reminder that there might still be survivors somewhere, but it seemed so far away. They turned another corner, only to be met with a dead end. A tall, rusty gate blocked their path, the metal twisted and broken as though someone had tried to force it open before the world had gone to hell. "We're trapped," Jessica said, her voice full of panic as she slammed her hands against the gate. "There's no way through." Alex cursed under his breath. They couldn't stay here. The infected were closing in, and they had nowhere to go. Their escape had led them straight into a corner. "Look around," Alex urged. "There has to be something we can use." Maya's sharp eyes scanned the area and then spotted something in the shadows, a pile of old crates stacked against the fence. "Maybe we can climb over." Alex moved toward the crates, his mind working quickly. It was risky, but it was the only option. "Help me move them." They pushed the crates into place, forming a makeshift ladder up to the top of the fence. But as they climbed, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The infected had closed in on their location, and there was no time to waste. They needed to move faster. Maya was the first to reach the top, and she reached down to help Jessica. Alex was the last to climb, glancing back to make sure they weren't being followed too closely. But as he reached the top of the crates, something caught his eye. Two infected figures were lurking at the corner of the alley, their bodies twisted and malformed, their eyes empty and wild. "Alex, hurry!" Jessica yelled from above. With a final push, Alex hoisted himself over the top and onto the other side of the fence. They were out of the alley, but they weren't safe yet. The infected were still out there, hunting them down. They couldn't stop. "We need to keep moving," Alex said, his voice urgent. "Stay together. Stay quiet." They sprinted through the open streets, trying to put distance between themselves and the infected. Their footsteps were muffled by the chaos around them, the distant fires, and the cries of the dying. But as they ran, Alex couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being hunted, by more than just the infected. The world had become a nightmare, and they were trapped in its center. As they pressed forward, the sounds of the city, of their pursuit, grew louder. The hunt had begun, and there was no turning back. The streets had become a labyrinth of destruction, their once familiar landmarks now twisted and unrecognizable. Alex and his group had pushed on through the night, but exhaustion weighed heavily on them. The rush of adrenaline from their escape was beginning to wear off, replaced by the suffocating reality that there was no safe place left. Their breath came in ragged gasps as they rounded another corner, the last remnants of the city skyline barely visible through the smoke and haze. The distant sound of chaos, sirens, screams, and the constant growl of the infected had become a constant hum in the background, a cruel reminder of the world they once knew. "We can't keep running forever," Maya said, her voice low and strained. She was leaning against a crumbling wall, her face pale and covered in dirt. "We need to find a way to fight back. There's no more hiding." Alex nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. His mind raced as he scanned the horizon, trying to come up with a plan. They had no weapons, no supplies, and no idea where the next safe zone might be. The world outside the compound was a battlefield, and every corner they turned felt like it could be their last. "You're right," Alex said. "But we need to survive first. We can think about fighting back later." Jessica was trembling beside them, her eyes wide with fear. "What if we don't make it? What if we're already too late? The infected, they're everywhere. They'll catch us." "We'll keep moving," Alex said firmly. "As long as we keep moving, there's still hope." But deep down, he wasn't sure. The world they had known was gone. The infected were relentless, and they were closing in fast. Even if they found a way out, would it even matter? The virus had consumed the city, and there was no telling how far it had spread. As if on cue, a loud, bone-chilling scream pierced the air. Alex's blood ran cold. The infected were closer now, drawn by the sound of their footsteps. The low moans grew louder, echoing off the buildings around them. "We need to move, now!" Alex shouted, snapping them out of their stupor. The infected were coming, faster than they had anticipated. They sprinted down the alley, their legs aching from exhaustion, but fear pushed them forward. The sounds of the infected were growing louder, their guttural cries reverberating off the walls. Alex could hear their shuffling footsteps, the scraping of claws against the ground. The alley was a dead end. They had reached another barrier, a rusted gate leading to an overgrown courtyard. Alex cursed under his breath. They were trapped again. "There's no way through." Maya gasped, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at the gate, her breath shallow and rapid. "We'll have to fight," Alex said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We don't have a choice." Jessica stepped back, her body shaking. "Fight? But we don't have anything, no weapons, no tools. How are we supposed to fight them off?" "We'll use whatever we can," Alex said, his heart pounding. He scanned the courtyard. There were broken pipes, discarded crates, anything they could turn into a weapon. They had no time to waste. The infected were closing in, and they were running out of options. "Here!" Maya shouted, picking up a jagged metal rod. She handed it to Alex, her face grim. "It's better than nothing." Alex gripped the rod tightly. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He turned to the others. "We stick together. We'll fight them off, and when the opportunity comes, we break through. Got it?" They nodded, bracing themselves as the sound of the infected grew louder. Alex could see them now, figures stumbling toward the alleyway, their limbs twisted and broken, their faces a grotesque mask of decay. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural hunger, and their mouths dripped with saliva as they dragged themselves forward, drawn to the scent of the living. "Here they come," Maya whispered, gripping the metal rod in both hands. "Stay close." The first infected reached the entrance of the alley, its movements jerky and unnatural. Alex swung the rod at it, connecting with its head. The force of the blow sent it sprawling to the ground with a sickening thud. But more were coming. They would be overwhelmed if they didn't act quickly. "We need to keep moving," Alex said, urgency in his voice. "Fight and move. Keep them at a distance." They fought tooth and nail, using whatever they could find to fend off the growing swarm. Alex's arms were sore, his heart racing as he swung the metal rod, knocking back one infected after another. Maya and Jessica fought with equal ferocity, pushing the infected back with kicks, punches, and makeshift weapons. But it wasn't enough. The numbers were too great. Alex's thoughts raced as he glanced around. There had to be a way out. There had to be a chance. And then he saw it, a small gap in the gate, just big enough for them to squeeze through if they could clear the infected. "There!" Alex shouted, pointing. "Through the gap. Move!" They shoved their way toward the opening, desperately pushing back the infected as they went. Maya and Jessica were right behind him, their breaths shallow and panicked. But just as they reached the gap, a roar erupted from the infected. One of them lunged, its claws raking across Alex's arm. He gritted his teeth against the pain but didn't stop. They had no choice but to push through. With one final burst of strength, Alex shoved the infected away, his body crashing against the gate as he squeezed through the gap. Maya and Jessica followed close behind, and they tumbled out into the open air, away from the chaos. They were free. But the danger wasn't over. The world outside was even worse than they could have imagined. The infected had taken over everything. And as they stood there, breathless and shaken, they realized something else: there was no longer any place to hide. The world was lost. The nightmare had only just begun.